Hey guys, tonight we journey into a world where even the sun can get fed up, slam the door shut, and disappear entirely. Imagine waking up one morning, stretching beneath your paper thin futon and realizing it's still pitch black. The birds aren't chirping, the farmers aren't working. The world feels paused like someone hit mute on the universe. Welcome to ancient Japan, a time when gods walked the land, spirits governed rivers, and most importantly, the sun could go on strike. You step outside only to be met with an eerie twilight. Everything looks like it's been wrapped in gauze, soft shadows without source, a sky like soot. Crops are withering in their paddies, the wind moans low through the trees, and even the insects seem to be waiting for something. It doesn't take long before whispers spread. Amaterasu, the radiant sun goddess, has vanished. She's locked herself away in a cave so deep and hidden that not even moonlight can find it. And yes, before you ask, this wasn't some casual, I need a break situation. Amaterasu didn't just dim her light to mope for an afternoon. She went full do not disturb, slammed the spiritual equivalent of a cosmic door, and threw the key into a shadow realm. The result, a total shutdown of heaven and earth, the divine version of a solar system meltdown. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always amazed by how far this little channel reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle through the darkened realm, tracing the first threads of a story that weaves light, pride, tantrums, and sacred mirrors. In Shinto mythology, Amaterasu is no minor goddess tucked into the background. She's the sun itself, personified. Her light nourishes rice, the most sacred grain in Japan. Her warmth makes the sakura bloom, and the snow melt from mountain shrines. But even goddesses, it turns out, have breaking points. Historians still argue whether Amaterasu's myth originated purely from indigenous Japanese tradition or absorbed influence from early mainland beliefs in solar deities. What's clear, though, is her outsized role in shaping not just the mythos, but the national identity of Japan. She isn't just any celestial being, she is the celestial being, the linchpin, the one whose absence turns gods into nervous wrecks. So, why did she leave? What drove the sun to vanish behind stone? The answer, as you'll soon see, involves a sibling who makes Loki look emotionally stable. Susanoo, the storm god, is her younger brother. The two were born from the cleansing ritual of their father, the god Izanagi. Amaterasu emerged from his left eye, glowing like dawn. Susanoo from his nose with all the subtlety of a hurricane. It's not hard to imagine who got better birthday gifts. You picture a family gathering in the heavenly plains, Amaterasu sitting upright in her golden radiance, Susanoo already barefoot and sulking under the banquet table. Their rivalry is cosmic in scale, and unfortunately, like many divine tales, it all goes downhill from sibling drama. But tonight, you don't just watch these events from afar, you're in the thick of them. You feel the shift in temperature as Amaterasu's light fades. You hear the nervous muttering of rice farmers and fox spirits. You smell the faint char of abandoned incense drifting in temple courtyards that no longer glimmer. And in this suspended twilight, you keep moving forward toward the cave that swallowed the sun and the chaos that pushed her there. Of course, not everything in the story fits neatly together. Some scholars argue that Amaterasu's withdrawal symbolizes a solar eclipse. Others suggest it's an agricultural allegory, perhaps the temporary fading of sunlight during seasonal change. But the poetic weight of the story carries you beyond the need for footnotes. Because sometimes myths explain not just natural phenomena, but emotional ones, like the need to retreat, to hide, to refuse the world your light when it becomes too much. As you walk further, the world around you starts to change. Leaves seem less green, the air thicker. The gods aren't just missing their sunshine, they're growing desperate. Crops won't grow, prayers go unanswered, and worse, chaos begins to spread. You're no longer just watching a cosmic family spat. You're watching the scaffolding of divine order creak under strain. Still, one thing's certain. The story of Amaterasu is no quiet bedtime fable. It's a grand celestial soap opera full of mischief, broken boundaries, trickster solutions, and somehow a sacred mirror that will change everything. You follow the muted horizon, and the closer you get, the quieter the world becomes. It's not just the birds and cicadas who've gone silent, it's as if even thought itself has hushed, waiting for something to break the spell. And then you start to hear the stories, whispered by fox spirits in shrines painted in shadow on the paper doors of forgotten temples. Tales of how this all began. Tales of a storm god with a nose for trouble. Susanoo, Amaterasu's brother, isn't what you'd call low maintenance. If Amaterasu is the serene glow of sunrise, Susanoo is the thunderclap that startles you out of bed at 3 a.m. You learn that their quarrel wasn't just a squabble over divine chores. It was born from ancient jealousies, cosmic ego, and more than a pinch of emotional immaturity. He had been ordered to leave heaven. Not gently, more like, take your tantrums elsewhere. And before going, he decided to visit his sister to say goodbye, which went about as well as you'd expect when a chaos god swings by your celestial rice field. At first, he pretended to be penitent. He offered her a peace gift, swords and jewels forged from their divine regalia. The exchange was more than symbolic, it was an ancient rite, and from it sprang new gods. Historians still debate whether this myth points to actual rites of political alliance, or if it represents the balance of masculine and feminine power in early Shinto cosmology. Either way, the vibe quickly soured. Within moments of this sacred swap, Susanoo's inner hurricane returned. His idea of bonding, tearing up her rice fields, flinging fussies into her palace, and chucking a flayed horse, yes, a flayed horse, through her weaving hall's roof. Imagine trying to work the loom while dodging horse entrails. It's not exactly a live, laugh, love kind of workplace. Amaterasu's response was not theatrical. She didn't unleash divine wrath or scream across the heavens. No, she simply vanished. She shut herself inside the Amano Iwato, the heavenly rock cave, and sealed it from the inside. No light seeped through, no sound escaped. The sun was gone. And here's where it gets interesting. Not just in the myth, but in the mystery. Scholars still argue whether this tale was used to explain natural disasters like typhoons and solar eclipses, or if it's a metaphor for the disruption of order when feminine energy is disrespected. There are even theories tying it to ancient fertility cults, where the hiding of a goddess symbolized seasonal death and rebirth. What's certain is that her departure wasn't just a celestial inconvenience. It was a breakdown of divine reality. Without her, crops failed, the gods panicked, and the heavens dimmed. You walk now in that half-world, where panic lives just beneath the surface, where the silence of one being causes the chaos of many. And chaos, well, it has a face. You pass temples overrun by creeping vines. Sacred deer wander aimlessly through overgrown paths, their coats dulled by twilight. Offerings sit untouched. The kami, the spirits of place and power, have gone eerily still. It's said even the 8 million gods of Japan paused their squabbles when Amaterasu disappeared. They gathered outside her cave, desperate for a plan. Of course, no divine emergency meeting would be complete without some interesting contributions. Kyuame no Uzume, the goddess of dawn and mirth, who arrives not with weapons or strategy, but with a wooden tub, a mirror, and zero shame. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. For now, all you see is the cave's entrance in the distance. Rough and looming, it pulses with the faint dread of total isolation. Inside sits the sun goddess, wrapped in silence, her light folded in upon itself like origami. You take a slow breath. There's still more to uncover before you reach her, like how the gods attempt to coax her back out, how laughter becomes more powerful than thunder, and how a mirror, yes, a literal one, holds the key to restoring the sun. You imagine the inside, cold, soundless, the kind of darkness that swallows both shadow and thought. And inside that hollow, the sun goddess herself, curled around her own radiance, refusing to shine on a world that no longer deserves her. But outside the cave, things are anything but still. The gods, kami of every stripe and station, have assembled like celestial townsfolk at an emergency PTA meeting. Except no one brought cookies, and everyone's just slightly afraid the universe is about to unravel. Which, to be fair, it sort of is. You find yourself among them now, standing beside Omoigane, the god of wisdom, who's probably drafting an 8-point action plan on divine stationery. You glance around. There's Futodama the ritualist, busy gathering sacred offerings. Tajikarao the strongman, cracking his knuckles. And then stepping lightly into the clearing like a performer who knows she owns the stage. Ame no Uzumi. You'll remember her. Mirth goddess. Wild card? Not exactly who you'd pick to solve a divine blackout. And yet, all eyes turn to her as she surveys the grim, hunched crowd with a grin. She doesn't shout. She doesn't stomp. She just asks for a tub, some sake, and a rope. You know this part is about to get weird. Here's where the story leaves the realm of orderly myth and drifts into sacred comedy. Uzume turns the tub over and climbs on top. She begins to dance, but not the kind of dance that would be welcome at a royal banquet. No, this is interpretive, unhinged, gloriously undignified, and, eventually, shirtless. As she shimmies and hoots, the other gods, at first baffled, begin to chuckle, then laugh, then roar. The kind of laughter that rattles your ribs. That makes you forget, just for a second, that the sun is gone and the world is breaking. It's this sound that reaches the ears of Amaterasu deep in her self-imposed exile. Laughter. Honest, unrestrained, cosmic laughter. Now, historians still argue whether this episode was meant to mirror actual festival rites, some of which included ritual nudity, comedic performance, and sake-fueled chaos. The dance could also be read as symbolic of how joy, not force, restores balance. Or maybe it's just a reminder that not all miracles come in solemn robes. Some show up barefoot, grinning and shaking it like the world depends on it. Inside the cave, Amaterasu frowns. Why is everyone laughing? She tiptoes to the door, curiosity pushing past grief. And just as she peeks out, bam! Tajikarao yanks the door open, and the light spills back into the world like warm sake from a tipped cup. But let's pause here. Not everything is back to normal. Amaterasu doesn't just skip out and resume her duties with a cheerful, "my bad." No, the gods have to offer her more. A mirror, for one. A polished bronze surface. Strange in a world where almost nothing is reflective. This mirror is placed just outside the cave. When she peers into it for the first time, she sees herself. That moment, her reflection, the goddess gazing at her own divinity, is layered with meaning. Some say it represents self-realization. Others see it as a political metaphor, a call for imperial rulers to gaze inward before ruling outward. Still others link it to ancient ritual objects, hinting at an early worship of solar symbols in pre-Shinto Japan. But maybe, just maybe, it's about light recognizing itself. About remembering you are still needed even when you feel discarded. And when Amaterasu sees herself again, when she is reminded of who she is, she steps forward. Light returns. Shadows flee. And the gods collectively exhale for the first time in what feels like an epoch. Back in the present, you walk beneath lanterns newly relit, their glow bouncing softly off mossy stones. You notice how the trees seem greener already, how even the crickets have found their rhythm again. The balance has returned, but not without cost. not without mythic flair, mirror-induced self-reflection, and one very naked goddess on a wooden tub. You chuckle quietly, because of course the world was saved by a dance. Of course laughter mattered more than thunder. The gods may be eternal, but they still understand embarrassment, and how joy, ridiculous joy, can shake open even the heaviest door. Amber afterglow of the world reborn, and the air feels somehow fuller now, like it's been holding its breath for centuries and finally let it out. The light is warm again, not just in the physical sense, but in that curious, ancient way that makes leaves shimmer just a bit brighter, and shadows seem more respectful of boundaries. But the story doesn't end with Amaterasu's reappearance. Oh no, you've probably noticed by now, kami rarely just move on. They spiral, they echo, they linger. And so, with the sun back in place and Uzume basking in the glow of being the goddess who saved the heavens via interpretive dance, we now shift to the part of the myth that humans would later carve into imperial identity. Because, after all this divine drama, the question lingers, who gets to wield that radiant legacy on Earth? You glance to your side and suddenly you're standing on a beach, a white shell-strewn coast called Himuka. A young man walks across the sand toward you. He is tall, impossibly elegant, with features both stern and youthful. This is Ninigi no Mikoto, grandson of Amaterasu, who has just been chosen for a rather important errand, to descend to Earth and bring divine order to the messy, mortal world. This moment, known as Tensen Korin, or the descent of the heavenly grandson, is less about gentle guidance and more about establishing the divine right to rule. And it is, in every sense, a family affair. Amaterasu hands him three treasures: the sword, the mirror, and the jewel. You remember the mirror? Yes, the same one that lured her out of hiding. The sword? That's Kusanagi, the one pulled from the tail of an 8-headed dragon. And the jewel, well, historians still argue whether it symbolizes the heart, the soul, or political legitimacy wrapped in shiny packaging. The three items become known as the imperial regalia of Japan. Think of them as the world's most sacred starter pack. They don't just glisten, they govern. To this day, these objects remain at the heart of Japan's imperial rituals. Their locations are kept secret, their forms rarely seen. Most Japanese citizens have never glimpsed them, and never will. As you follow Ninigi down the slopes of Mount Takachiho, mist curling around his sandaled feet, you notice how Earth feels different now that divine feet have touched it. Trees lean slightly inward, as if listening. Even the frogs seem quieter. But the descent is not just spiritual, it's deeply political. Many scholars view this part of the myth as a retroactive justification for the imperial family's authority. You can almost hear a court scribe in the 8th century mumbling, "Let's say the emperor's great-great-great-great-great-grandma is literally the sun." And you know what? It worked. For centuries, Japanese emperors were considered living gods, tracing their lineage back to Amaterasu herself. And while you wander through time alongside Ninigi, you begin to wonder, did he want this role? Was he honored? Reluctant? Historians still argue whether this celestial assignment was framed as a noble calling or a divine burden. Either way, there's no turning back now. He doesn't come alone, of course. He brings with him a host of divine retainers, many of whom would later be worshipped in their own right. And here, on this fertile land, begins a slow, graceful entangling of myth and monarchy. A lineage begins, one that will persist through wars, reforms, and the occasional coup attempt involving some rather suspicious calligraphy. You sit beneath a pine tree and listen as the waves kiss the shore. Somewhere the jewel catches a sliver of light and glows softly, pulsing like a heartbeat. You think about the mirror tucked carefully away, forever reminding rulers to see themselves clearly. And you wonder, how often did they look? How often did they dare? But your reverie is broken by a distant sound, the clink of sword against sheath. Because, of course, no celestial dynasty forms without a few conflicts. You rise, brush the sand from your robes, and prepare to follow that sound, into a world where heavenly descent meets very human resistance. You follow the distant clang of metal on metal through a haze of morning mist, your sandals silent against the mossy earth. The sea is behind you now, replaced by deep forest and unsettled wind. And soon enough, you find yourself peering down into a fertile valley, and it's far from empty. Below you, a tribe is gathering. They are not celestial beings, they are earthly kami, native spirits of the land, the Kunitsukami, and they are not exactly thrilled about these new heavenly imports, stomping in with divine regalia and family trees that sparkle in the sunlight. You've stumbled into one of the lesser known, but critically important moments in Shinto mythology, the diplomatic takeover of Earth, one awkward peace treaty at a time. You trail behind Ninigi as he approaches the local deities. There's a stiff bow, then a tense silence, and then the negotiations begin. Imagine a celestial town hall meeting, with lots of eyebrow raises and ceremonial rice offerings. Historians still argue whether this mythic encounter reflects a real cultural merger between incoming Yamato elites and existing indigenous groups. Some say it's metaphorical, others see it as coded history. But as you watch, it's not all hostility. There's something warmer too, an exchange of gifts, of traditions, of customs. The land begins to absorb the newcomers not through conquest, but through a slow, deliberate fusion. And as the two divine factions talk, you notice something odd. No one seems eager to draw blood. A few side eyes, sure, maybe a passive-aggressive poem or two. But swords stay sheathed. Still, not everyone is willing to shake hands and chant blessings. Enter a god with a name that sounds like it belongs on a vintage sock bottle, Okuninushi, the Great Landmaster. And honestly, he kind of deserves the title. He's handsome, clever, beloved by the local kami, and something of a mythological heartthrob. Oh, and he rules the very land Ninigi is supposed to inherit. You spot Okuninushi reclining in a field of reeds, absolutely unbothered by the celestial delegation marching toward his estate. He's the type who solves problems with charm and loopholes. The ultimate let's circle back guy. And for a while he resists the heavenly handover with measured calm and a touch of divine mischief. But eventually, after a few plot twists involving sacred birds, magical weapons, and what may or may not be a giant talking rabbit, Okuninushi agrees to cede power on one condition. He wants a magnificent palace built for him, a shrine so grand it will echo his memory forever. The gods agree and Izumo Taisha is born, one of Japan's oldest and most sacred shrines still standing today. You wander its massive wooden pillars and towering rooflines, watching priests in white robes sweep the sacred ground with brushes made from feathers. The air hums with a quiet reverence. Even now, people come here to pray for love, business success, and good fortune. And you get the sense that Okuninushi is still here, reclining in some divine side room, casually reviewing wish lists. And so the earth is handed over, not with a clash, but a compromise. Ninigi takes up his divine post, and his descendants begin what will become Japan's imperial line. You sit under a camphor tree and think about how rare that is. A myth where negotiation, not violence, decides the fate of a nation. But then again, we haven't even touched on the sword yet. Remember Kusanagi? The dragon-slaying blade tucked into the imperial regalia? That story is waiting just ahead, and it starts with a storm god in serious need of anger management classes. You step through the rustle of grass and drift into a scene that smells like salt and thunder. The air is heavy, charged. Somewhere far off, waves hammer a shoreline you can't yet see. And standing on a jagged outcrop, silhouetted by crackling clouds, is Susanoo, the wild storm god himself. He is not what you'd call subtle. Drenched in salt water and pride, he's the type who enters a room like a monsoon enters a valley, suddenly and with furniture flying. At this point in the myth, Susanoo has been exiled from heaven for reasons that would fill several very dramatic diary entries. Let's just say smashing his sister's sacred loom and throwing flayed horses into her palace didn't exactly scream model deity behavior. So here he is, washed up on Earth, a storm with legs and a temper, and the land, it's not ready for him. You watch as he roams the countryside of Izumo, leaving chaos in his wake, until one day he stumbles upon a grieving family. A father, a mother, and their one remaining daughter, all trembling by a riverbank. Their 7 other daughters? Eaten. By what? Oh, just an 8-headed, 8-tailed dragon called Yamada no Orochi. Classic countryside problem. This is where the myth really leans into heroic drama. Susanoo, sensing a chance to reboot his reputation, and maybe flirt a little, volunteers to slay the beast. But not before demanding the hand of the last daughter in marriage, because even in ancient myths, paperwork precedes monster fights. Historians still argue whether Yamata no Orochi symbolizes an actual natural disaster like river floods or volcanic activity. Some suggest it reflects the conquest of older local beliefs by emerging state-sponsored deities like Susanoo. But at the time, to the people who told this story by firelight, it was a thrilling bedtime saga, part horror, part romance, all wrapped in ritual drama. You inch closer as Susanoo sets his trap. He instructs the parents to brew 8 vats of the strongest sake they can make, placing each one at a point along the river where the dragon usually appears. The scent of fermented rice curls through the fog, warm and intoxicating. Then comes the rumble. Yamada no Orochi arrives, not slithering but surging, its 8 massive heads trailing steam and venom. Each one dives greedily into a vat, and soon the beast is drunk, drooling, swaying, and completely vulnerable. Susanoo strikes. His sword flashes like lightning, carving through scales and bone. The river turns crimson, in a PG-13 way, and one by one the heads fall. But when he cleaves open the dragon's belly, wait, what's that? Something glinting inside the carcass? It's a sword, a legendary one. This is Kusanagi no Tsurugi, the grass-cutting blade, though at this moment you might call it the surprise gut prize. Susanoo takes it as a trophy and later presents it as a peace offering to his sister, Amaterasu, the sun goddess he once terrorized. Awkward? Yes. Effective? Also yes. Kusanagi becomes one of the 3 imperial regalia of Japan, alongside the mirror and the jewel. Together they form the symbolic heart of Japan's emperor mythology. No ruler is complete without them, or at least a very hush-hush replica, since the real ones are famously never seen. And this sword? It doesn't just look cool. Later legends claim it can summon wind, slice fields of grass to save its wielder from fire, and basically do all the things your average katana can't. You run your fingers along an invisible sheath, the echo of divine craftsmanship lingering in your palm. That blade, born of dragon's gut, carried by gods, hidden in royal shrines, still lingers in Japan's deepest cultural memory. And while no one can confirm its whereabouts, it's likely stored at Asuda Shrine in Nagoya, though no one's allowed to see it, it continues to cast a long ceremonial shadow. And Susanoo? He settles down. Kind of, marries the daughter, builds a palace, gets a few local shrines named after him. Eventually, he even becomes a protective deity for sailors and storms. Not a bad arc for a guy who started by hurling tantrums and dead horses. But just as you're beginning to relax into this victory, the tale loops back to heaven, where Amaterasu is not quite ready to forgive, and certainly not ready to shine.